When the Czarn Dominion issued the decree, the words were sterile, diplomatic even, species 6263, biological volatility determined irreconcilable with galactic stability, authorization of neutralization protocol granted. To them, it was simply pest control on a cosmic scale. But for humanity, it was the beginning of hell. The Czarn were an ancient and mathematically precise species. Their empire spanned thousands of systems and had endured for millennia without a serious challenger. They considered themselves custodians of balance, peace, and galactic order, but their order was cold, authoritarian, and brutally indifferent to what they couldn't predict. Humanity, with its volatile nature, its capacity for both creation and destruction, terrified them, not because humans were the strongest or most advanced, but because humans were wild, unmodeled, illogical. They laughed in the face of annihilation and won wars through desperation, not superiority. The Czarn saw this as a disease of the mind. At first, Earth's leaders didn't believe the warnings. A few intercepted communications from fringe outposts, a refugee ship of insectoid traders bearing tales of systems scorched by Czarn fleets. It all seemed too distant, too unreal, but reality came in fire. In a single, coordinated assault, Czarn warfleets appeared across Sol's outer system. Neptune was the first to go. Its mining colonies, orbital platforms, and relay stations were vaporized within minutes. By the time transmissions reached Mars, it was already under orbital bombardment. Earth watched in stunned silence as its colonies were picked off like sparks, flickering out in a windstorm. The UN collapsed within days. States dissolved, cities rioted, and yet, even amid chaos, something else stirred. Defiance. Human history is steeped in tragedy and war. We had wiped ourselves out nearly a dozen times and clawed back each time more advanced, more determined. The Czarn didn't expect resistance, much less a resistance that adapted faster than their data models could update. When the Czarn's vanguard fleet reached Earth, they didn't find a people surrendering. They found a planet already turning itself into a fortress. The sky was thick with improvised orbital weapons. Satellites rigged with nuclear warheads detonated in suicide strikes. Civilian launch vehicles were repurposed to deliver tungsten rods at relativistic speeds. Ground-based lasers blinded scout ships. It wasn't organized, it wasn't efficient, but it was relentless. They bombarded cities from orbit, reducing megastructures and monuments to ash. But every crater birthed 10 more fighters. Every fallen child became a martyr, every demolished town a rallying cry. The Czarn had fought thousands of wars, but never with a species that refused to die properly. Humanity's death spiral turned into a whirlwind of insurgency. But it wasn't just brute force. Humanity's strength wasn't only in its rage. It was in its creativity. Hackers from ruined universities infiltrated alien comms. Engineers in hidden bunkers reverse engineered captured Czarn tech with terrifying speed. One group reprogrammed captured drones to act as suicide scouts. Another used terraforming equipment to generate atmospheric conditions that scrambled enemy sensors. The Czarn called it algorithmic chaos. Humans called it Tuesday. And when they tried to cleanse Earth with a planetary scale viral nanite mist, it mutated spontaneously into a dormant state thanks to a fluke human protein. One Czarn scientist noted, "They're not supposed to survive this. Nothing does. But humans did." Again and again, this phase of the war was later called the Burning Sky by survivors. Every night fire lit the heavens, ships falling, orbital strikes, space battles visible with the naked eye. But amidst the burning came unity. Tribes, nations, political ideologies, all irrelevant. There was only humanity now, and it was bleeding, but not broken. The Czar's plan had been simple: exterminate, erase, and forget, but they had miscalculated on the deepest level. In trying to wipe out humanity, they had summoned something far older than any empire, the will to fight back, and they were about to learn what that truly meant. The war didn't end quickly, it mutated, just like humanity's survival instincts. What the Czar envisioned as a short, brutal extermination devolved into a grinding, asymmetrical conflict across systems, moons, and dead worlds. When Earth stopped being a viable target, the fight expanded outward, to the asteroid belts, the Martian tunnels, Europa's deep-water cities, and eventually beyond the Sol system. The Czar had never encountered resistance like this, not from a race they considered primitive and irrational. But now they were locked in a battle not of technology, but of psychology, and in that arena, humans were monsters. The thing that shook the galactic observers most was not how humans fought, but how they adapted. Every failed defense turned into a new offensive strategy. Every captured alien ship was reverse, engineered faster than the Czar could encrypt its core systems. Human prisoners, even under torture, fed their captors false data, sometimes with such skill that entire fleets were lured into traps constructed by ex-miners and programmers using junked orbital parts and viral malware. By the third year, human tactics had stopped resembling traditional warfare. They were irrational, erratic, and devastatingly effective. A Czar commander once wrote, "They send children with bombs made from cooking equipment. They weaponize solar flares. They infect our predictive AI with stories, not viruses, stories." It was true. Human myth had become a weapon. Resistance. Fighters encoded false legends into Czar databases, fictitious gods, fabricated heroes, imaginary weapons systems, and watched as enemy protocols rewrote entire strategic doctrines to account for threats that didn't exist. One fake dossier about a mythical unit called the Black Sun Choir caused the Czar to divert 5 fleets from real battles for over 8 months. When they realized the deception, morale plummeted. The idea of a species so insane that it could weaponize imagination was horrifying to them. But it was merely human nature taken to its logical extreme, and then came the turning point. It didn't begin with a superweapon or a miracle fleet. It began with a whisper on the fringes of contested space, on a backwater moon orbiting a gas giant. A Czar outpost went dark. When an elite recovery unit arrived, they found the station intact, unscathed, and deserted. Not a single body, no signs of violence, only a single phrase, scrawled in blood across a wall: "You should have killed us all." That phrase, later traced to a captured human poet turned insurgent, became the motto of the resistance. Every system the Czar lost, that message would appear somewhere, carved into the hull of a disabled ship, burned into the soil of a destroyed colony, broadcast on every frequency. It became a ghost story within their ranks. The more the Czar tried to erase humans, the more those words returned. Entire alien civilizations, watching from the sidelines, began to question everything. If the mighty Czar, keepers of order, victors of countless wars, were being systematically humiliated by a species they labeled as volatile primitives, then perhaps the galactic hierarchy wasn't as immutable as they thought. Smug neutrality turned to fear, and fear turned to quiet awe. The humans didn't just survive, they infected the galactic narrative. Songs were written about them, not by them, by others, by frightened alien races who once feared the Czar and now found hope in the chaos the humans represented. In forums, in encrypted comms, in hidden conclaves, whispers circulated. What if the humans win? What if they change everything? Humanity had become something more than a species. It had become a symbol, a myth made flesh, a story the galaxy couldn't stop reading. And deep in their empire, for the first time in 1,000 years, the Zarn felt something unfamiliar, uncertainty. For all their data, all their control, all their logic, they had failed to calculate one variable: humanity's refusal to play by the rules. Because when you try to exterminate a people who find purpose in resistance, who dream in fire and rebuild from ashes, you don't just lose a war, you ignite a legend. At first, the Zarn didn't understand what they had done. In their minds, they had dealt with the threat of humanity decisively, scattering fleets, glassing colonies, and broadcasting their victory across the stars. But the problem with scorched earth tactics is that they only work if the seeds don't survive. The Zarn didn't realize that in every ruined city, every cracked dome, every silent orbital platform, there was a human survivor. And humans, as the galaxy would learn, don't just endure, they remember. The remnants of humanity didn't huddle together in fear. They dispersed like wildfire, fragmented, invisible, unstoppable. They dug deep into the soil of forgotten moons, wired ancient satellites into makeshift communication networks, and turned asteroid mining rigs into mobile war foundries. Humanity was no longer a civilization. It had become a swarm of ghosts, unseen, unpredictable, furious. The Zarn Empire, built on order, struggled to comprehend this chaos. Their military was based on precision, hierarchy, and control. They sent elite units to quash these lingering human cells, expecting surrender or flight. Instead, their soldiers began to vanish. Patrols never returned. Whole stations went silent. Surveillance feeds showed grainy, flickering images of strange rituals, of humans painting war symbols with blood, of untraceable weapons built from scraps, of laughter in the dark. There was no front line, there was no formal resistance. Humanity's war had become something more primal. It wasn't about retaking Earth or reclaiming old territory. It was about sending a message: we are still here, and we are watching. What truly unnerved the Zarn, however, was not the guerrilla tactics or the unpredictable strikes. It was the psychological warfare. Humans had always been storytellers. Now they told tales meant to unmake their enemies. Entire Zarn outposts began reporting nightmares, not metaphors, literal shared dreams implanted by hacked neural interfaces and distributed via hijacked entertainment frequencies. Troops would wake screaming, whispering names of human spirits who stalked them in the shadows. The most feared was simply called Mother. No one knew her face, only her voice. A calm, cold whisper on Zarn comms before a base was breached. The message was always the same: you hurt my children. I will never stop hunting you. Some dismissed it as psychological manipulation. Others began to believe humanity had found a way to weaponize trauma itself. A particularly haunting example came from the mining colony of Jux, where the Zarn had enslaved surviving human children for labor. The operation went silent for 13 minutes. No alerts, no explosions, just nothing. When the signal returned, every Zarn overseer was dead. The children were alive, untouched. In their hands, each held a hand-stitched toy or book. On the walls, smeared in Zarn blood, was a single phrase in English: "Mother was here." It was never confirmed whether this was the work of one person, a mythic creation of the Resistance, or simply the collective will of thousands channeling their grief into vengeance. But it didn't matter. The effect was the same. Fear spread, morale collapsed, and for the first time the Zarn began to doubt their inevitable victory. Humanity, fragmented and half extinct, had accomplished something the galaxy hadn't seen in millennia. They had inverted the war, the invaders were now the hunted, and in this new paradigm, every shadow could hide a human, every silence could mean death, every signal might carry a ghost. This was not the war the Zarn prepared for. It wasn't a battle of fleets or technologies. It was a cultural virus, a narrative that rewrote itself every time they tried to kill it. Humanity had become a legend, and legends, unlike soldiers, don't bleed. They haunt, they linger. In trying to erase the species, the Zarn had created something far more dangerous, a memory that refused to die. The shift began subtly, almost imperceptibly, as the Zarn's grasp on galactic dominance began to falter under the relentless pressure of humanity's guerrilla resistance. An unexpected transformation took root, not on battlefields, but in minds, in temples, in stories, in the hollow spaces between fear and reverence. The Zarn had once seen humans as animals, barely sentient creatures with a penchant for violence and innovation, but over time that view began to decay, and something far more potent took its place: awe. It began with whispers. Among the younger Zarn, the workers and soldiers who had grown up hearing terrifying stories of human resilience, to them, these weren't just enemies. They were beings who had refused extinction, who had defied the very laws of attrition and probability. While the Zarn had always worshipped order, logic, and ancestral knowledge, something about humanity's chaos, its emotion-fueled tenacity, began to fill a void their old gods couldn't touch. The elders scoffed, the priests condemned, but belief is a virus with no cure, and it spread faster than any edict could control. In remote colonies, murals appeared, crudely drawn but unmistakable, images of human warriors with glowing red eyes, clothed in fire and storm. In hidden enclaves, Zarn youth gathered to chant human phrases, corrupted through translation but carrying the essence of raw, untamed resistance. "You cannot kill an idea," they muttered in reverence. "You cannot bury a fire." What was once propaganda turned into scripture. What was once enemy footage became holy relics. The most dramatic shift occurred within the Order of the Void, the Zarn's most ancient religious sect. Their belief had always centered on entropy, that everything must fade, and only by embracing the silence of the void could one find truth. For centuries, this had been a source of control, of discipline. But then came the human contradiction, a species that stared into the void and screamed, that built songs and cities in the teeth of extinction, that refused to fade, a splinter group formed within the order. They called themselves the Children of Flame, and to them humanity was not a mistake of evolution, but a divine anomaly. They burn, said the new texts, even when drenched in the void. They rage even when shattered. This is not weakness. This is divinity. The Zarn High Council tried to suppress these beliefs, banning human relics, executing known sympathizers, and purging temples. But this only deepened the devotion. Martyrdom has always been the lifeblood of faith, and every death fed the growing myth. Soon, sectors of the Empire were openly refusing orders, claiming allegiance not to Zarn doctrine, but to the flame of humanity. What made this particularly insidious was that it wasn't orchestrated by humans at all. This was no psychological operation, no cultural weapon deployed by the resistance. This was organic. This was the enemy elevating their destroyers to sainthood. It was perhaps the cruelest irony. The more the Zarn tried to stamp out the human threat, the more they transformed humans from enemies into gods. Even on worlds untouched by the war, children carved human faces into stone and whispered prayers to names like the Mother of Vengeance. The soldier eternal, or the laughing flame, these weren't just symbols, they were moral frameworks. Stories of sacrifice, defiance, and unyielding strength became aspirational. To be human, even metaphorically, was to rise beyond fear. And in the ruins of old battlefields, Zarn pilgrims came, not to mourn their fallen, but to seek wisdom in the places where humans had made their stand. They left offerings, food, weapons, art. They didn't know if any humans still watched from the shadows. But they hoped, because somewhere along the way the war had stopped being about survival or territory. It had become something far stranger. It had become worship. The shift in galactic culture didn't end with religious reverence alone. It permeated art, politics, language, and education. What started as scattered acts of devotion evolved into a cultural renaissance across dozens of alien civilizations, all centered around the mythology of humanity. Even those who had never encountered a human in the flesh grew up surrounded by their stories. For the first time in recorded history, a single species, once vilified and hunted, had become the unifying symbol of identity across star systems. And what was most astounding, humanity had done nothing to cultivate this. It had grown without them. Museums once dedicated to ancient Zarn victories now displayed human relics. A rusted Earth-made sidearm found on a battlefield, a scorched datapad containing the journal of a wounded soldier, even fragments of a tattered Terran flag. These were treated not as spoils of war, but as sacred artifacts. Artists crafted towering sculptures of human warriors facing impossible odds. Songs were composed in mimicry of Earth's music, though often altered through alien perception, blending frequencies and instruments unfamiliar to the human ear. The result was hauntingly beautiful tributes to defiance. Political figures began to invoke human phrases during speeches: "We endure," "Burn brighter," "No surrender," using them to rally support for reforms or to justify radical change. On the outer colonies of the Krayan Accord, entire political movements modeled their governance after the Terran Confederacy, despite having no direct diplomatic ties to Earth. They saw in humanity a blueprint for resistance, for innovation under pressure, for unity forged in hardship. Humanity in essence had become an idea, an ideology, even language evolved. The Zarn tongue began adopting human idioms, often mistranslated but spiritually intact. "Bleed for what matters" became a common oath. "Make them remember why they feared us" was etched into the armor of elite guards. The phrase "human resolve" turned into shorthand for anything seen as unbreakable. In academic circles, courses on human strategy and mythos became standard at elite institutions. Graduate students debated the cultural ramifications of humanity's Iron Flame epoch, often referencing battles humanity had long forgotten, or never recorded at all. Of course, not everyone embraced this new cultural wave. Entire species rejected what they saw as dangerous hero worship. They accused human sympathizers of betraying their own heritage. Extremist groups arose, decrying human contamination and calling for a return to traditional values. But even these opponents only served to validate the depth of humanity's impact. They couldn't stop it. They couldn't silence it. They could only scream into the storm. For humans still hidden among the stars, operating in remote bunkers or scavenging aboard cloaked vessels, this sudden transformation was both bizarre and unsettling. They had expected genocide, exile, and extinction. They hadn't expected to become living legends. And while some humans used this shift to their advantage, trading on their reputation to build alliances or inspire revolt, others found it deeply uncomfortable. To be worshipped was to lose your humanity. To become a god was to cease being a person. The Human Leadership Council, fragmented and scattered, debated how to respond. Should they step forward and reclaim their place in this new mythology? Should they correct the misconceptions and half-truths, or should they remain silent and allow the galaxy's narrative to continue unchallenged? In the end, no consensus emerged. The galaxy had already made its decision. Somewhere deep in the Acheron cluster, a new monument was unveiled. It depicted a human child holding hands with an alien elder, both standing on a scorched battlefield. The inscription read in hundreds of languages, "They fought because they must. They endured because they chose to. And we remember because we dare not forget. It wasn't built by humans. It was built for them." And in that act, the galaxy quietly admitted a truth too powerful to ignore. Humanity had transcended flesh. It had become legend. While the galaxy's cultures continued reshaping themselves around the mythology of humanity, a question loomed in the minds of scholars, historians, and even survivors themselves. What happens when the legend meets reality again? For over a generation, humans had been presumed extinct or scattered into shadows, ghosts of a war that had shattered half the known universe. Stories of their heroism and wrath had calcified into near-religious canon, but very few beings had actually seen a living human in decades. Those who had kept silent, often out of fear or reverence. And then, everything changed when a lone Terran vessel emerged from the void. It was a mining ship, barely operational, sending out a distress signal on outdated frequencies. It drifted into the trade lanes of the Kalari Republic, where officials debated whether it was some kind of hoax. When the ship was finally intercepted and boarded, the crew found a woman, mid-30s, lean, wearing patched-up body armor and holding a revolver that hadn't seen maintenance in years. Her name was Lieutenant Marin Hollies, and she was very real. Word of her survival spread faster than any official statement could contain. Before long, representatives from a dozen systems pleaded for an audience, not to interrogate or punish, but to learn. She wasn't a diplomat, she wasn't a general, she wasn't even a high-ranking figure in the war, but to the galaxy, she was a relic come to life, the embodiment of everything they'd mythologized. Hollies, for her part, was stunned. To her, the war had only recently ended. She hadn't realized how much time had passed while surviving in the dark zones. She hadn't expected to find humanity glorified, and she certainly hadn't expected her words to carry the weight of scripture. When she spoke at the Galactic Forum, millions tuned in, some to witness a miracle, others to challenge a perceived pretender. Her voice was tired, rasped from years of breathing recycled air and swallowing silence. But every word struck like thunder. "I'm not here to be your hero," she said. "I'm not what the stories made us into. We were scared, angry, desperate, but we didn't fight because we loved war. We fought because you gave us no choice. And if you're looking for gods, you'll be disappointed. We weren't divine. We were just human, and we did what we had to do." Her humility only deepened the galaxy's reverence. Here was living proof that humans didn't crave worship or domination. They craved freedom, dignity, and survival. Hollies didn't come with an army. She came with memories, scars, and truth. And in that truth, the myths found new depth. Suddenly, art began shifting again. Songs moved from epic war chants to ballads of loss and endurance. Statues began to portray not warriors in glory, but survivors carrying wounded comrades or children beneath bombed-out skies. The myth had matured. It wasn't just about fire and fury. It was about resilience, empathy, and sacrifice. The discovery of Hollies reignited a dormant search effort. Civilizations once too afraid to mention humanity now sent exploration fleets to the edge of known space, hoping to find other survivors, other legends in waiting, and they did. A small fleet hidden in a nebula, a colony deep under a frozen exoplanet, a mobile station orbiting a rogue planet. Each new rediscovery fueled the revival of humanity, not just as a story, but as a people. And through it all, humanity began to emerge, not from the center of power, but from the edges. Not as rulers, but as reminders. Not as myths, but as the rare proof that in the face of extinction, spirit endures. They tried to erase humans. Instead, they became immortal. And now, as survivors step forward from the shadows, the galaxy must reckon with a truth even deeper than worship. Humanity isn't a story. Humanity is still here, and it remembers.